Hello and welcome to Shaking and Sipping. This is the show where we shake up a cocktail or other mixed drink, have a sip, talk a bit about where it came from, maybe look at some variants, and see how it is. We're continuing our quest to work through the IBA's official list of cocktails to see how those stack up. We're in the second section, the contemporary classics, and this week's contemporary classic is the Irish coffee. Now, the Irish coffee is kind of an interesting drink to look at, I think, in comparison to some others, because we both know sort of exactly where it comes from, and also not entirely where it comes from. So, let me explain. An Irish coffee is a fairly simple drink. It's coffee, whiskey, sugar, and cream. So basically, since a lot of folks take cream and sugar of some sort in their coffee anyway, it's coffee with whiskey in it. As you might imagine, that's been tried multiple times, multiple places. So we know there's a tradition of having alcohol in coffee in sort of Austria and the various German states that existed back in the day, going back hundreds of years, so going back to when sort of coffee first became common. It wasn't generally whiskey at the time. One common version used Kirschwasser, which is like a sort of a cherry liquor, not like a sweet liqueur, but like a cherry brandy kind of. And the other one that we have kind of a fun origin story for is the Pharisäer, which I'm sure I'm mispronouncing, which was a drink that apparently there was a coffee shop and all of its patrons wanted to have booze in their coffee, but there was a priest there or who was going to come there, and it wasn't acceptable to drink in front of the priest. So they added dark rum to the coffee, as well as sugar, and then covered it with cream in order to stop the rum smell from getting out of the coffee. I'm not sure if that works, but it's an idea. And then we're all drinking them, but then the priest realized what was going on, and he called them Pharisees, in a sort of odd reference to the Bible story that I don't quite get where he came with that, but that's what that means in German. And so that was a common thing in Germany, and it still exists, or it wasn't Germany then, in a German state, and it still exists in Germany to this day. So that goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. The Irish connection is where we have a very clear story. So that's what I mean, where we know of these drinks going back. There's also some French examples, a few other sort of Northern European examples. Not sure which one came exactly when, how they introduced, how they may have influenced one another, whether they were known of in Ireland at the time, etc. So we don't know what happened in the middle, but we know the story of Irish coffee. So Irish coffee was created by Joe Sheridan, who was the head chef at Shannon Airport in Ireland, and he created this drink. Now there's a few slight variants on the story of why he created it, that it was specifically to warm up passengers, especially those who had been on like unpressurized, uncomfortable planes dating back to when Shannon was really a seaplane base, or it was right next to one, and there's a whole thing there. I'm not sure about any of that story. The story I find interesting is that Brendan O'Regan, who was the director of food service at Shannon and went on to do a whole bunch of stuff. He's the guy who invented the duty-free shop at airports, and he invented special economic zones and has this really complicated legacy. There's a great 99% Invisible episode called Call of Duty Free. It's all about Brendan O'Regan and sort of the legacy of all this stuff. But anyway, in that episode, which you should listen to if you're interested, they play a bit of an archived recording where Brendan O'Regan relays seeing a plate of food that Joe Sheridan was taking out and just ripped him to shreds for the fact that it wasn't visually appealing. There was nothing exciting about it. And so as soon as Joe delivered the plate, he went back into the kitchen, came up with the Irish coffee and said, "How's that for some appeal?" And then made that like the signature of the airport and such. So that's where it comes from. That appears to be a true story. Again, whether he had already had the drink just with, rum instead in the German style or something, and his only tweak was switching it to Irish whiskey, I don't know. But he is where we get that idea from, and for various reasons, again, listen to that episode. For many years, all air travel to Europe from North America had to pass through Shannon Airport in Ireland. Essentially, there are exceptions. And so many people got introduced to this drink that it became sort of a classic thing. So that's Irish Coffee Story. We're gonna make 3 versions today. We're gonna make one following the IBA spec. We're gonna make one that I wonder if it might be disappointing a little bit, doing what I think a lot of folks do when they say they're making an Irish coffee, which is just pouring some Baileys into coffee. And then finally, we'll go ahead and make that older German version. So I'm normally a pretty light roast coffee guy. I think that dark roasts taste incredibly burnt and bitter, but this is traditionally made with a fairly strong, fairly dark roast. I'm going somewhere in the middle. I'm going to be using some Cafe Vita organic Theo blend. This is what they call it medium dark, which I think is actually closer to dark, but that's not up to me. But anyway, that's what I got for this event. So hopefully that will be fitting for the mixing of these products. I'm gonna go boil some water, brew some coffee, we'll make them up. All right, for version 1 here, we're just gonna start off with, again, what I think is what a lot of people might do for an Irish coffee. And so I'm gonna start off here. This, like I said, I don't know if I said this, I don't have enough Irish coffee mugs, so we're only gonna be using that in one of the drinks. This is just a latte mug. I've been preheating that with boiling water, of course. And we're gonna take our Bailey's Irish Cream. We're gonna take 30 milliliters of that. So the question is basically, is this an all-in-one Irish coffee? My guess is no. It's also not nearly enough of it, but I tend not to see people use a ton of it. And then again, we're not even gonna measure this. This is just sort of the basic version. I'm just gonna pour a partial glass there. Give it a quick stir. And this is our very basic Irish coffee. So it smells actually pretty nice. I'll give it that. It smells sweet. There's a little bit of whiskey, but not any alcohol, just a hint of sort of like vanilla, barrel, that kind of thing. And then there's some coffee coming through, but it's not incredibly pronounced either. So it's pretty mellow. It kind of rounds off any bitter notes of the coffee. There's a little bit of sweetness, a little bit of creaminess, sort of back a palate. It doesn't really read as whiskey. It's not bad. It doesn't strongly read of anything. Like, it's no longer really strong coffee. It's not strong whiskey. It's just sort of creamy, sweet with a little bit of bitter. I don't know. That's fine. I'll finish it. All right, for our second drink, we're gonna go ahead and make the IBA spec. For this one, I do have an Irish coffee mug of sorts, which again has been preheating. And the method for this one is going to be to start with coffee, which again, I don't know that I'd really measure this drink, but we want 120 milliliters. Whew, that is hot. I wish I had my jigger with a handle. So that's 4 fluid ounces. Then to that, we want to add 1 spoon, and I'm going to go pretty light on this. 1 light bar spoon of ultrafine sugar, and our whiskey. I'm using Tullamore Dew here. It's nothing special. It is a Irish whiskey, very standard. I think it's not bad. And of this, we are looking for 50 milliliters, so about 1 2/3 ounces. Now we want to stir that until combined and the sugar dissolve. Which, that coffee is hot enough. That dissolved real quickly. Then we want to top that with our cream. Now, IBA specifies an amount. I don't know that we really need to measure the amount of cream on the top. I think I'm just gonna float until we get coverage. I have whipped this, not quite to even soft peaks, but enough that hopefully, yes, we'll get a nice layer up on top. I might have slightly over-whipped that, to be completely frank with everyone. It's one of those where it looked not quite thick enough, and then I gave it just a few more whisks, and I think I pushed it over. Oh well. That's enough for me. I don't need a ton of cream in there. And this is typically not garnish. Some people put like an espresso bean on top or something like that. I'm not going to. This is our Irish coffee. I'm guessing, based on the story of the Germans using the cream to hide the rum, that the whiskey will be hidden as well. Yeah, kind of. There's this weird sort of sweet note that is definitely from the whiskey, but it's not overly present. And one other note about this is we always want this layer. It's apparently a real no-go to stir that cream in. Folks get angry about this. There are traditions involved. So that's pretty good. It's actually really nice. It is a bit more whiskey forward. There's both a little bit more sort of mid-palate of some of the sort of sweet notes of the whiskey, going into a little bit of the barrel, but in the not too dark part. It's still kind of just warm, sweet. And then you end with just a little bit of burn right at the very end of the drink, which I think actually works really well because the drink up till that point is incredibly creamy. It's not very sweet. I undercut the sugar a little bit, I think. That bar spoon should have been sort of, heaping. I don't want it heaping in this drink. I like this right where it is. It's not sweet. The coffee is really just playing a bass. If we had more sugar, we'd actually probably bring out more coffee. And we're not getting that here. The coffee is playing a role of sort of very dark chocolate in the background, just a nice base for the creamy whiskey to happen. Yeah, and I do get kind of a chocolatey vibe. After I set it, I get it even more on the tasting. I like that quite a bit. I think that vary the sugar to your own preference. I think a lot of folks would want a little more sugar in this. I know I usually want a little more sugar in some drinks. Here I don't. I think this is perfect. And moving right along, we're to our final version. We're going to go ahead and make a version of that German drink that led a priest to accuse people of being Pharisees a couple hundred years ago. Again, I've got a preheated latte mug here. Recipes on this vary, but I'm just going to basically follow exactly what we did for the Irish cream, but sub in the rum, because that is how several modern recipes read, and I think that makes sense. So that's 120 milliliters, or 4 fluid ounces of coffee. A scant bar spoon of sugar. 50 milliliters of rum. I'm using Plantation OD. Generally, you'd have some sort of darker, little bit of age on it rum. Some folks say that all the German rum at the time was Jamaican. I don't think that's true. This is a Bajan rum, the Plantation OD. I would want something that isn't plain, but I wouldn't pull out Smith & Cross here either. I'd want something in the middle. We're going to give that a stir to dissolve. Looks well dissolved. And we shall top that with our cream. Since you can't even see this one, I'm not going to bother using the spoon to float it. We'll just pour that out. And this is a rum and coffee drink that was probably popular in Germany or German territories 200 plus years ago. The cream does work again. There's just a slight coffee and there's something else there nose, but I really am not getting rum. So that one's more assertive than the Irish Whisky was. The rum is much more there. And it's not really sweet, but it's those sort of notes that rum sometimes have that are like if, molasses or brown sugar weren't sweet. I'm getting a lot of that really forefronted. But then as that fades, we're bringing in the coffee, which is reading as chocolate. So I'm getting this sort of slightly burnt sugar molasses note into a really dark chocolate, just a little bit of creaminess in there. Again, I quite like it. I think that some folks would argue for a little more sugar here, again. That's kind of fun. Well, thanks so much for coming along with me this week as we looked at the Irish coffee and a few things in that realm. I think these can be really fun drinks. It's not something I drink very often, if really ever. But if you're into coffee and you're into booze, give it a shot. You can do it with pretty much anything. There are variants of this basic formula with everything from tequila to brandies to weird fruit liqueurs, lots of stuff to play with there, so give it a try if you're in the mood. I'd appreciate if you did all the YouTube things like share, subscribe, comment, tell your friends, tell your neighbors, watch all the previous videos, etc. That'd be great. Visit on the blog at shakingandsipping.com. We'll have a write-up of this and each other drink, as well as most weeks we'll have IBA in real life, where the day after this video posts, I'll have a write-up of going to a local Seattle cocktail bar and getting the drink, finding out how they do it, etc. I don't know if I'm going to do this one. But I do know a couple of decent cocktail bars who have espresso machines, so maybe I'll ask them to come up with something. The way you'll know if that's going to post, other than just checking the blog every day, is to follow on Twitter at shaking_sipping. We always post whenever we're doing an IBA in real life or that sort of thing. That's all we've got for you this week, but I'll be back next week with the next drink on the IBA's list. Until then, happy sipping. Cheers.